Greetings viewers, we're playing with the wiring on the Sportster. Most Harley wiring looms are very similar, they use similar colours and all that sort of stuff. I just want to give you a few sort of basics here. So when this bike got pulled apart 15 years ago, and of course I can't remember where anything goes, I'm just putting it back together now. And I pulled it apart more than I should have. So I put the wiring back together. I was pretty happy. I had a headlight, high beam, low beam, and a horn, and a tail light. But I only had the stoplight working on the front brake, and I had no indicators, and I had no ignition. So we had to start looking. So perhaps the first step is you need a multimeter or a test light. This is like a brand name multimeter. I bought the cheapies, they don't tend to last. This is a baby Fluke. It was $60 or something, not too expensive. So you have a red and a black lead. Red burn positive, black burn negative. It will work the other way around, it just shows negative on the thing. So we come up to the battery terminal, the negative battery terminal, and I've just poked a hole in the cable. So I just push that into there. So now I'm connected to the negative. I get the multimeter and I go to the 2nd volt setting. I go to the battery and touch the positive terminal to make sure it's working, and I have 12.43 volts. That's good. So let's start at... So we'll go up the front and we'll have a look, see what we can do with the indicators. So the indicators weren't working. So my first step was to remove one of the indicator switches, which I did. I actually already had this off. So I look inside, I find the indicator switch, which is this big lumpy one here. Then I look inside to see what colour wires they are. And I have a brown, and underneath that brown is a green. So I know that a brown and a green wire. Now, I had a look inside the headlight. Because there's so many orange wires, the green. So I have orange going in this side, and the green coming out this side. And the green goes to both sides, so that's the green power wire. I assumed it was, and sure enough, when I touched it, I had 12 volts there. So Harleys are good, they use common colours. So brown is the right hand side indicators, the purpley mauve colour is the left hand side indicators. So I had power going for the green, coming in from the orange on one side and the green on the other side. I don't know why they do that. And there's 2 greens, one going to each side of the switches, one to the left, one to the right. So yes, I have power there. I have power going to the switches. So then I push the switch button and I had power come back to this brown here. So I knew the switch was working. Same, I tried the purple one and I had power coming back to the purple. When I pushed the purple button, there was power coming back to there. So I knew I had power going to the switches. I have put LED lights on here, which are polarity sensitive. It's a light emitting diode. If you have them the wrong way round, they don't work. And because they have a red and a black, you assume the red is the positive side and the black is the negative, but you never know. So I put that on straight on the battery and tested that, And yes, correct, the red is the positive. So I had wired them up correctly, so that wasn't my fault. It had this load equaliser, but because this bike, I bought it 20 years ago, I didn't even think LEDs were around back then. So load equalisers are generally used because when you put LED lighting on, they don't flash properly, so you have to put more resistance. Anyhow, so the moral to this story is, if somebody has modified the wiring and you have a fault, go straight to where they were playing with it, because it's quite likely that it's their fault. Harley wiring is very reliable. I've found it to be very good. It's nice thick wires, it tends not to break, it tends not to get shorts. It's good, it's good. And even now I think they use even better connectors. So yeah, so I went to this and I thought, what the hell's this thing doing there? And I thought, so I just cut the purple wire. And guess what? The indicators started working, but all four were flashing at once. So then I followed the purple and the brown wire further down, and where they'd attached it in, the wires were touching together. So I just taped them off and my indicators work. So that's all it was the bodgy workmanship of the previous person. So that fixed my indicators. How good's that? Now, so my brakes. The stoplight was working on the front brake, but not on the rear brake. So I know it's not the light, and probably not the wiring, because it was still working on the front brake. So so straight away I go looking for the brake switch. So I go to the master cylinder. I can't see a brake switch. I follow the line goes back over to the other side. We go over to the other side, and over here we have a pressure switch. It's a brake pressure switch, which you can see the terminals hanging out the bottom. I've just peeled the rubber back. You can see the rubber feeder going to the caliper. See, going back to there, to a brake pressure switch. So, same again, I've got an orange wire. I'm assuming, they're both, oh no, one's more orange than the other. One's orange, one's closer to red. Light orange, dark orange. So, I have got my multimeter, and sure enough I have power coming into one side, and I got a wire and bridged out those two. So I put a wire from one to the other, which is what the switch would do when you put your foot on the brake and you put pressure on there. A little, it would have a spring stopping it, but when you put pressure on there, a metal plate would come up and touch the contacts and make a contact. So I bridged out those two wires, and sure enough the brake light worked. So I can deduce that there was a fault with that pressure switch. So I'm thinking, it's genuine Harley, that's going to be $100. I'm thinking, will I put another pressure switch in the line? And I thought, it sat for so many years, it's probably just stuck. I gave it a little tap with a hammer, and it come good. So I fixed the brakes. So now I have both brake lights are working. So now I've gone to the ignition. So I had no ignition. I've just got it hanging here. I'm just hanging in space. There's a CDI unit. Down the bottom is the pickup, which goes in the nose cone on the other side. And we have a coil. So first step with the ignition is same. We had this pink wire coming in. I assumed that was the power wire, and sure enough it was. So I got my multimeter, plugged it into the earth with the black wire, and the red the red pointer I touched on there, and sure enough I had 12 volts or somewhere close to that. So I knew I was getting, it wasn't the main switch fault, or I knew there was power getting to the coil. So then I thought, is the coil at fault? So I switched my multimeter to ohms. So to test the coil, you put one contact you have to disconnect the wires to do this. You disconnect those two wires, the pink wire and the white wire, then you touch from one side to the other, and you should have just over 3 ohms. I think it was 3.3 or 3.4. Then you pull the spark plug leads out, still with the wires disconnected, and then you put your probes in one side to the other, and you should have 10,000 or a bit more, which the coil checked out okay. So I had power to the coil and the coil checked out okay. So then I've come back further. I've got my CDI unit here, and I had another CDI unit, and I plugged that in, and still no ignition. So I put the original one back in. Then I started looking more at the wires. Now on this little plug here, I've just poked the wires into it, because you have to disconnect those wires to remove this pickup. So this is a pickup that tells it when to spark. This is in the nose cone on the other side. So it's got a metal plate that runs around through this little gap here. Yeah. And it's a solid plate with a gap, a slot in it. And when the slot hits, it makes it spark. It triggers a thing. And all it was, I hadn't put the wires in properly. I hadn't plugged one of those wires in properly. And now I have spark. So that's just a... So wiring is scary, but it's sort of not that scary if you just approach it logically, I guess. Now somebody told me, this was a motorbike mechanic, he said if ever you got a broken wire, this is where it'll be broken, up in the head stem, because of the steering going backwards and forwards, you know, as you turn the bike. This is where the wires get moved the most. So if ever you think you've got a broken wire, cut the loom open up here and have a look, because this is where the broken wire will be. Up near the headlight, up at the head stem, because that's where it's getting worked the most. Anyhow, that was just a little basic thing. Just hopefully that's some help to you. And yeah, thanks for coming. Please subscribe. And